Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to continue our conversation now with Congressman Henry Cuellar. Congressman, in a letter to the president this week, you warned that this week, when Title 42 lifts, they'll have a complete loss of operational control over the southern border. And that's going to have a profoundly negative impact on border communities. You know, the White House is saying that they've got a plan here. Why are you saying they don't? What is it that you are hearing?
You know, they've been talking about this plan for the last 2 years. They've been blaming the Republicans. They've been blaming Congress. How long is this plan going to be when will it take effect? I've seen that plan. With all due respect, a lot of it deals with processing, moving migrants from the border over to the interior. We need to have a way that we can have a policy where if Title 42 goes away, it looks like it's going to go away unless if the Supreme Court steps in. If it goes away, they have to have a policy of a orderly pathway to asylum through our bridges. And if they don't follow that pathway, they need to go back. You know, they got to have something in place. I've looked, with all due respect, I've looked at that plan, and I don't think it's, you know, they've been talking about it, and it hasn't worked. Now they're asking for the $3 billion or so. It's mainly for food and shelters, processing, transportation, but it doesn't really talk about security.
So you also pledge in this letter to work on bipartisan legislation. That's not going to get done in the next few days. What is it that you're envisioning in the new Congress that is going to be possible with a Republican-controlled House?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. The only thing we can do is add more money. I don't know if it'll be the $3 billion, but it'll be monies there to meet the president's request or as much as possible. Number one. Next year, I mean, it's going to be a show in so many ways. And, you know, impeaching the secretary doesn't move us 1 inch closer to solving the issues. And I hope that we can have the president. The president can do this, can implement a policy of a orderly process for asylum at the bridges. And if not, they go back. They got to have a consequence. The president can do that because, look, keep in mind,
through executive order.
Yeah, well, look at it. I mean, President Obama didn't have immigration reform, didn't have all the things that people have been asking for, but he was able to manage the border in a much better way. So the President Biden can do this, but without due respect, I think his advisors are doing a disservice to him.
I'm sure the White House would say it's a hemispheric surge. It's worse than it's ever been. I want to get to something you've been raising consistently, is you've been faulting President Biden for failing to visit the border. Policy experts would say, you know, photo op doesn't do much. To you, what does going to the border actually achieve? And do you think it's the reason he hasn't gone is because the White House is afraid it's going to backfire, that the border agents you're talking about will be disrespectful to him?
Well, look, there's different ways of visiting the border. He doesn't have to go there for just a photo op. But, you know, a leader has to show images of being up there in the front. He can do that. He can do it in so many ways. And I'm not asking for a photo op, but I think the message that will go to not only the men and women in green and blue, but to the border communities. I'm more interested in the border communities. Will say, hey, look, I'm the president of the United States. I'm here at the border communities. I feel your pain.
Mm-hmm. All right, Congressman, we will be watching what happens in the coming days. Good luck to you and your community. We'll be right back. We go now to Keisha Lance Bottoms, who is a senior advisor to President Biden for public engagement. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Immigration is top of mind here. You just heard from two Democrats who have been sharply critical of the administration not doing more in the face of this expiration of Title 42. What is the administration doing to urge migrants not to come?
Well, the administration has been working for months planning for the end of Title 42. And you have to remember, Margaret, these aren't people who are attempting to illegally cross the border. These are people who are presenting themselves, asking that they be processed in accordance with the laws of the United States. So people have to remember Title 42 is a public health emergency order. If Title 42 goes away, we will then go back to Title 8, which allows for a process, which is the reason why the administration has asked Congress to fund more than $3 billion to help us provide the resources that will be needed to process these migrants, to make sure that people are treated humanely, to make sure that the bordering communities have the resources that they need. And we need Congress to be a partner in this, and we need Congress to act because this is a global issue that we are facing. And the White House alone can't do it. We need support from Congress.
So, I mean, you make an important point that it is a right to be able to ask for asylum. What happens when Title 42 goes away is that people can't be expelled. What it allowed for was expelling without the guarantee of an asylum hearing. So this means that people will be allowed to stay until they get their day in court. So this will mean more people coming into the United States. They may be in a process that could last years, frankly. And so that's why I come back to that fundamental question of what is the White House doing to say, don't come to the border and try to claim asylum?
Well, what the White House has done has said very publicly that we want people to avail themselves of a lawful process. What we are seeing happening is that many people are taking advantage of the fact that Title 42 may go away this week. We see many people exploiting migrants, saying, come now, or you lose your ability to come at all. And that's simply not the case. But again, this is not just an issue that we are facing in the United States. This is a global issue. So the president has been working very closely with our partners across the globe to address this global issue. But we also need partnership at home. We need partnership from Congress. And we need to focus on what this decades-old issue is. And that issue is making sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform, not focusing on trying to impeach the Homeland Security Secretary. You think about impeachment. Impeachment is for misdemeanors, high crimes and misdemeanors, bribery, treason. This is a difference in policy approach, not the best use of our resources, certainly not the best use of the time that Congress has to work with the White House to address this issue.
Okay, so we're about to face that Republican-controlled House. It looks like gridlock, so that doesn't really get you to a place for bipartisan reform. If we are only left with executive actions, what can President Biden do?
Well, Margaret, I want to remind you that in the first 2 years in office, President Biden has signed over 200 bipartisan bills. So he's not giving up on working in a bipartisan manner to address immigration, an issue that we should all be concerned about. What we need is funding from Congress, and we need to continue to work toward comprehensive immigration reform. So the president has said he wants to get things done in a bipartisan manner. The American people have said they want us to work together in a bipartisan manner. We need everyone at the table with ideas. Remember, Republicans will control the House. So the need for Republicans in Congress to say what they won't do has now been removed. Now tell us what you will do to work with the president to make sure that we have comprehensive immigration reform. But in the immediate future, we need funding for the resources that will make sure that we can address the immediate needs on the ground.
Are Democratic leaders telling you you will get the $3.4 billion?
Well, we're going to keep trying. We're going to keep pushing. So it's our hope. We're working daily around the clock with members of Congress to make sure that funding is in place because those resources are needed. And this is, again, not just a Democratic issue. It's not a Republican issue. This is an issue that impacts us all, even those of us who don't live in states that are on the border. You heard Senator Manchin talk about the needs in West Virginia and how immigration reform is needed in West Virginia to help with the economy in West Virginia. So we're going to keep working around the clock. And simply because people don't see the president at the border doesn't mean that he's not working.
Right. Well, why doesn't he go to the border? He was just in Arizona. Why wasn't it worth his time?
Well, you have to remember, Margaret, when the president travels, it's not like you or I jumping on an airplane and getting off and going to our destination. Everything comes to a halt. So all of these things are in consideration for the president. Is that the best use of resources? All of the resources that will be diverted on the ground when the president makes a visit.
Is that why he didn't go?
Is that visit... Well, I can't speak to why he has or has not gone. I'm just speaking to the fact that it's a bit more disruptive for the president of the United States to travel than you or I. But what the president has done is continue to lean in on this immigration issue. It's something that he ran on. And what we know over the past 2 years, every single thing that the president has run on, he's put time and resources into addressing it. So immigration, we know, is a problem that he did not create. Our issues with immigrations are decades-long issues, and he will continue to lean in through the White House and through Congress to get comprehensive immigration reform done.
All right, we'll be watching for that. Keisha Lance Bottoms, thank you for your time today. We'll be back in a moment. Despite some hopeful new economic indicators, consumers are watching their spending this holiday season. Mark Strassmann has more from Atlanta.
'Tis the season to be jittery, with an economy offering both the spirit of Santa and the specter of Scrooge. Here's a gift.
Inflation is coming down in America.
Down for the 5th straight month from its June peak. Gas prices dropped more than 50 cents over the last month, averaging $3.15 a gallon, a steal compared to mid-June, when typical gas prices began with the number 5. Inflation's easing, but it's become a siege. Still above 7%, still near a 40-year high.
The U.S. economy has slowed significantly from last year's rapid pace.
No surprise, the Fed this week raised interest rates again, this time by 0.5 percentage point.
Without price stability, the economy doesn't work for anyone.
The Fed's 7th rate hike this year stokes another worry.
It's clear that the Fed is not done. They're going to continue to raise interest rates, more likely than not push us into recession.
Recession pessimism fuels the Scrooge in this holiday economy, along with a bare stock market, a housing slump, a drop in manufacturing output. November's retail sales were the biggest decline this year. Worrisome to retailers, shoppers spent less in holiday categories: electronics, clothing, toys.
I'm definitely doing couponing, Amazon deals, shopping local, and then obviously like making my own stuff.
The holiday shopping season is the time of year when retailers need consumers to feel jolly. But for millions of shoppers, this year's goal: find gifts that fit under the tree and into their budget. Margaret?
Mark Strassmann, thank you. Another thing Americans are watching closely, that surge of viruses inundating us this holiday season. Dr. Scott Gottlieb is a former FDA commissioner and a Pfizer board member, and we welcome you back, Dr. Gottlieb.
Thanks a lot.
The White House says this is the worst flu outbreak in a decade. RSV, COVID, they're surging. 77% of ICU beds in the country are currently full. How dangerous are these next few weeks?
It's going to be a difficult few weeks. We're right in the thick of respiratory pathogen season. That's the worst in recent memory. It's being driven largely by flu. This is a historic year for flu, probably the worst in the last decade, as you mentioned. COVID is exacerbating that. We also have an epidemic of respiratory syncytial virus, which seems to be abating right now. Flu also seems to be peaking in certain parts of the country. It's rising in other parts of the country. It's decreasing in the south, rising in the north. And COVID is contributing to that. It's pressing families. It's also pressing hospitals. As you mentioned, 80% of hospital beds right now are full. The hospitals haven't been this full since the peak of the Omicron wave last winter. The difference is that last winter, 25% of those hospital beds were filled with COVID admissions. Right now, only 6% are filled with COVID admissions. So a lot of them are influenza admissions and other respiratory pathogens like adenovirus, parainfluenza. All the things that plague us each winter are coming back with a vengeance.
A lot of bugs, but if the flu vaccine is such a good match, as you've said before, to this current strain, why are so many Americans getting sick?
Well, a lot of people aren't getting the vaccine, first of all, and we know the vaccine isn't 100% protective against infection. What the vaccine does in the setting of flu is reduce your chances of having a symptomatic infection and reduce your chances of having a severe outcome, similar to how we're using it with COVID. The predominant strain of flu right now that's circulating is H3N2. The vaccine, as you said, is a very good match for that strain, maybe 60 to 70% protective. The other strain that's circulating is H1N1. About 20% of infections are H1N1. The vaccine is also a good match for that strain. And the difference between those two strains is that H3N2 typically peaks earlier in the winter. H1N1 may peak later. So it's not too late for people to get their flu vaccine. If people go out and get it now, they're going to have some immediate protection from it. And we could see a situation, as we've seen in other winters, where the predominant strain, H3N2, starts to decline and then H1N1 infection picks up.
Well, the other thing, particularly annoying parents of young kids like me, is the shortage of antibiotics. Why don't we have enough supply?
It's really demand driven. So distributors made estimates on how much demand there would be this year. They've had lower demand the past 2 years because there was less bacterial infections because we were all taking certain steps to prevent the spread of disease. Demand went up this year. They anticipated some increase in demand, but not as much as we're seeing, and not this early in the season. So it's not any kind of disruption in supply. This isn't like what we had with baby formula, where manufacturers have been taken out of the market. This is a sophisticated supply chain. All the manufacturers are in the market. They just didn't anticipate this much demand this early in the season. Supply should catch up with demand, and there are alternatives for the things that are in shortage, like amoxicillin. The oral suspension of Tamiflu is also in shortage. Doctors and pharmacies can compound that from the capsule. So there are alternatives. It's just going to be difficult in some instances for families to get their hands on those alternatives.
Yes. You know, I know you're saying things are better versus where we were on the COVID front. But Dr. Fauci was on this program a few weeks ago, and he said he was tracking new COVID variants that evade the protection of monoclonal antibodies that are used for treatment and prevention. I know there's been studies on that also say the same thing about the vaccine. What level of protection is there against these new variants?
Well, there was data out from the CDC on Friday that showed that the vaccine's providing good protection, particularly in the older individuals. The new vaccine, this new bivalent booster based on the new strain, so it's based on BA.5. What we're seeing right now is 40% of infections are BQ.1.1, which is a derivative of BA.5, the strain that the vaccine's based on. About 30% of infections are BQ.1. There still should be good protection from the vaccine against those new variants. The one we're more worried about is a variant called XBB. So far, that's not spreading in the U.S. that much. It's about 5% of infections. It's held steady for about 4 weeks right now. That strain spread a lot in Asia. It didn't spread a lot in Europe. So it could be the case that BQ.1 and 1.1 crowd out XBB. But the concern is that if XBB continues to persist, you could see a second wave this spring. We don't think that's going to happen, but it's a possibility. But people are still going to get good protection from the existing vaccines, the updated vaccine, against the strains that are circulating right now. So the study that came out from CDC showed about 70 to 80% protection from hospitalization from those over the age of 65, on top of the protection that they got from the old vaccine. So that's quite meaningful for a lot of individuals.
I want to ask you about Title 42. In March of 2020, that was when the CDC director put this in place. It's a public health law to expel migrants in order to stop the spread of disease. That was the premise. Is there any public health reason to keep it in place now?
Well, look, I think as a matter of public health, we should be expiring a lot of these emergency measures that we put in place, not just Title 42, but also the national emergency that we put in place. I think what's happening is a lot of these are being extended to serve other policy and political goals. That's ultimately going to undermine our ability to implement these public health measures in the future. If we need to have expedited removal of people crossing the border illegally, I think that should be contemplated in the context of broader immigration reform and as a matter of law enforcement, but not as a public health measure at this point. I think all of these public health emergency measures that we put in place should be expired.
Dr. Gottlieb, thank you so much, and I hope you stay healthy this holiday season.
Thanks a lot.
We'll be right back. Finally today, we are coming up on day 300 of the war in Ukraine. Our MTS Tyab reports from this country where the cold winter is being weaponized by the Russians against the weary yet resilient population.
In liberated Kherson, Life is desperate. Russian attacks on the energy grid have left the city without fuel and power. And one of the few ways to get a hot meal now is to cook over an open fire in the street.
9 months of Russian occupation has obliterated any semblance of a normal life for people here. But what Ukrainians have shown time and again is that they'll do anything to help each other.
Including at Kherson's main university, where desperately needed aid has been brought in by these professors from Kyiv, who hadn't been able to contact their colleagues here for months because Russian forces controlled their lives so tightly.
Remnants of Russia's occupation have been swept into this room. You can see flags, photos of Vladimir Putin, and while Russian forces are gone, make no mistake, they're still targeting this city.
At an elementary school in the Kyiv suburb of Bucha, which is still haunted by the atrocities committed by Russia here, life is slowly returning to normal. But regular power cuts means it's cold and dark until the generator kicks in, bringing with it warmth and light, something in short supply at home, says 8-year-old Dana.
There's no electricity. It must be really hard.
It's very hard, she says. Our house is freezing. On one of the school's walls is now a memorial to Katya, Matvey, and Vanya, who were all killed in the early weeks of Russia's invasion, says acting principal Irina Vaschenko. Every morning we have a moment of silence, she says, because we must never forget them. At a small ceremony in one of Bucha's cemeteries, a memorial service for fallen soldiers, including Natalia's brother and husband, who are both buried here.
How are you feeling?
I feel pain, she says. I'm trying to come to terms with things, but I can't. A feeling felt by so many across this war-scarred country. Imtiaz Tyab, CBS News, Bucha, Ukraine.
That's it for us today. Thank you for watching, and we wish you a happy Hanukkah for those who celebrate the holiday. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.